All right, then. It looks like pretty much everyone who is to come is in the hall, so let's not dilly-dally and get on further. Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to this ramble, more like than a proper presentation on flavor text. I am Joonas Lind, also known as Daemon in the online circles, and a little bit on who the heck I am and what even this talk is about. So I've been in the RPG hobby for about 15 years now, and I've been designing games for 8 years. Actually yesterday I released this, a urban fantasy game, and as you can see, this is really no no sign of authority here. I'm just pretty much just gonna tell you about quite a few observations on what makes interesting and tasty flavor text, and and why flavor text is actually important in games is in general is engagement through immersion, as the con is about role-playing games, when you actually get little bits and pieces of the world, can actually deepen the immersion quite a bit rather than just I hit the monster with this +1 sword. And as I've been actually quite recently, even in the academic world, we're going to build this lovely little hedge here of what this talk actually isn't about, which is how to actually world build. World building is quite a subjective thing, and everyone does it in their own way. So I'm not going to be here and telling you how to do your own work or how to write lore within it. And as flavor text probably for quite a few is very familiar from magic cards, there still is no magic formula on actually how to make the best flavor text. And as said, like these are observations on how we can make yours better, but there is no one true way to make the best one. And as per usual, we're going to have to start laying a little bit of a foundation on what we are actually talking about, so that we are speaking the same language. So first, a few definitions, which we're going to start with world building, which is in this context we are talking especially about the constraints on what your world is, how it functions, and for the sake of argument, we're going to call it that it's essentially, if we're going to build essentially a narrative field, it's the width of the field. And as I said, rules and constraints on how the world functions, how it is, what are the truths of the world that are true regardless on where you are in it, and then we of course need to talk a little bit about lore, so what stories are within the actual world itself, so which is going to function effectively as the depth of the world. So we are trying to build a ocean with actually some depth in it, so we are not wading through ankle-deep waters. And while the example here is a lovely square, that need not necessarily be true for your own world, as none of us are, perfect, and it's kind of hard to make sure that it's the same depth everywhere. And, not everything necessarily needs detail, like pages and pages of details, like talking pages and pages about tree branches laying somewhere in Lothlorien. And yes, the square forms a lovely narrative space from within which we are working with, and the actual flavor text are these bits and bobs we are pulling from the narrative space and presenting those to the players. And the flavor text can be descriptions, stories, for example, what might be coming or what has happened, or just general tidbits. For example, where can for example use this weapon or item or where it's from, and position something meta for the players to work with. And in general, flavor text should not actually discuss any mechanics. While they can reference mechanics in some ways, they should not contain it, as flavor is more story and description. So here we have couple of examples of what the functions of the flavor text would be. So environment storytelling, which essentially is something you can find in the environment, or the environment itself tells you. And there is a quote, the distant mountain is a quote from Tolkien. So in an interview, someone asked, like, why didn't you tell a story of the civilization in the distant mountains you named in passing in your books? And to that, Tolkien responded, I could tell you about those distant mountains, except then I would have to create distant mountains for those distant mountains. So it can be, in essence, a recursive problem if you're trying to essentially build too much depth into your world. So the flavor text can then be some bits and pieces you can pull and bring interest to show that, oh, there's a wider world out there than what we are immediately playing in with, but not necessarily something that you have to flesh out too keenly that you actually have to then start a whole new chapter in your own world book. And I said, bring in a little bit of immersion that the items come from somewhere. If you have something like historic, like, oh, I have this, for example, you find a dress that actually, for example, increases your dexterity. That that can be called like a dress of grace. That it has come from somewhere, like for example, elven royalty, who, for example, just ate their sorrows away and suddenly gained a little bit of weight, so it needed the extra dexterity to actually get through the dances of galas. So you can use the flavor text to drill in to some distant lore that you don't have, like you don't necessarily have the time or the ability to get into, while you are actually playing campaign. And as campaigns in general need to have some limits, so you just don't branch out all over the place. You can also, of course, discuss local histories. So what has happened, what has happened right in this place, for example, where you find the actual item, or or how it relates to the politics in the area, or if you want to go make actual books in your setting, have them discuss on what has actually happened in that location, or if it's from some distant place from discussing a location, it can be somewhat inaccurate. And last but not least, hints, as earlier mentioned, the meta gameplay. We have an example coming on that in the next slide. So effective, for example, hinting on where you can use the item, so that you are not just hitting a single place on, or you find an object. It might be a little bit cryptic on how you actually want to use it, or how you would actually need to use it, and then present it on a little bit later once you, for example, find another object with some similarities on how you would actually put that into use. So, ingredients for tasty flavor text, which is probably the hardest thing to actually pull together on, since people have different tastes, people have different interests. So there are a few points of note that would help finding the place to put your things in. So one good idea would be to put your flavor text to be intentionally in the middle of something. So you're not necessarily just discussing some long history, some long histories from the beginning. It can be a bit a bit from the middle. And for an example of that, we actually have a magic card. In this case, a Beast of Burden. So a little bit of background for this card. There are 3 names there mentioned. There is an Urza, for people who are familiar with D&D. Urza effectively is an artificing wizard who creates these fantastical machines using magic, and is effectively trying to actually create order in his dimension. And some of the dimensions that he tried to create order in, he can't enter because time works differently. So he created a sentient golem called Karn, who, for some reason, silver in this world is not immune to time effects. And Karn is not the only golem that exists. So here can see Karn speaking to another wizard, Joira, that if it meant to be nothing but a machine, as in a generic golem there that looks pretty much exactly like Karn, Why did Urza build it to be like me? So there is a thought that Karn there has formed over time, and what the like the big thing here that puts it in very much in the middle of things is one specific word in the description is the word finally, meaning that Karn, the sentient golem, has been thinking this thought for a very long time and now just finally voiced it. So that there is a long thought process of his own existence, and only finally is voicing it to other people around him. Okay, and the next bit thing that can be used, though rather sparingly, depending on how your thing is like, is using the unknowable, as there is a lot of things that the players might and should not know, but there are also a lot of things that that can bring a lot of interest into what the goings on of the setting if it's something that they would not have any immediate means of actually knowing. An example for that is an item description for a weapon called Whisper of the Worm, for our Destiny fans. So Whisper of the Worm, in short, is this mean, ethereal, like maybe a little bit like necromantic-looking sniper rifle in the game. That while it looks mean, looks like to be look like a relic from one of the enemy factions in the game. Once you actually drill into the item description, you actually finally realize that it is actually effectively a storage place for a now kind of semi-dead deity for a somewhat different enemy faction that you actually get to kill in the game. And while within the game itself, you have no idea, like you just killed a huge ass worm god, so a literal monster worm. And it essentially just turns into dust in front of you. Once you actually find this weapon, you realize, oh, well, that's where the soul went. It's still around. Can't get rid of this gun, it's too good. But it still exists, and it has the opportunity to potentially cause mayhem later down the line. But yeah, as said, this is something that you kind of want to use a little bit sparingly. Like this is something something that happens outside the four walls of where the actual play space where your characters are. So it can either break the immersion a lot if it's like too heavy-handed, but at times it can also be something that brings a lot of something that they might have not known and they might want to actually explore further later down the line. And next. Tasty bit of what you can use in the flavor text is history engraved. So as said, items have history. Unless it's something that has been made new, the item has to come from somewhere. And if it's something like a relic or a legendary item that it has been told on in stories over and over the years, it might have something that has been not just traveled across the stories, but also something that has kind of been embedded into it. An example of that would be the silver pendant from Dark Souls. So in this case, it's just a small silver piece of jewelry, and listed as one of the ancient treasures of Analondo, so a kind of like the capital of the kingdom in the game. And it's something that's presented one of the four royal knights, and kind of also goes into a little bit of the meta gameplay aspect, as this is actually a usable item. It can be used as a it has been marred, and it can be used to reflect specific types of magic. And then. Also related to the meta gameplay earlier, would be places to go, and for an example, that would be the Baleful Gem from Path of Exile. So here you can pretty much see that the description is quite cryptic. Unless you play the game, there's quite a few spoilers in there. So if you have a hard time to sing it, the description is the withering glare of corruption, made corporeal and pellucid in crystal. So there's a couple of keywords if you also know the systems of the game. So so big things there is corruption, which is mainly a late game thing that won't be relevant for the players for a long time. And well, crystals and gems play a big part in the upgrades in that game. But the thing here that is most interest to us is withering, as when this item is actually combined with another, it can be used to clear out these indestructible roots that prevent you from traveling to a next area. So something that essentially effectively hints on you might have to find something to be used elsewhere. Well, not actually necessarily being a specific call to a mechanic. And kind of going in the same way, far of connections. And one that actually came up quite a bit in the research was that many people called to hire a poet. Not necessarily something that you have to do, but when the message in the items is a little bit cryptic, maybe a little bit poetic, especially when it's very brief, like a sentence or two long, it can like bring quite a bit of interest on what has happened behind that. What is not being told here? Yeah. Okay. No worries. Okay. And for an example of that would be, again, from Destiny, a weapon called the Last Word. And I know it's a little bit hard to see the description, but as I said, the name of the hand cannon is the Last Word. But the description says, yours, not mine. So, so not necessarily a little bit like that poetic, but cryptic, as it's like also in the description, it's being said from one like named person to another named person. So what has happened there, and what has made this made this very laconic phrase there on like what has happened, like what has caused this iconic words to be said in this specific situation. And of course, as for many, the big thing for, especially if you play Magic, is the humor. You can't really forget that. Though, as I said, need to be used sparingly, as like if you're trying to have a very very serious fantasy world, it's probably ill-advised to pepper in a lot of humor. But as a bit of a mid presentation humor break, there is a breastplate from Destiny again, and I know it's very hard to see, but the the description is, I didn't get hit. I didn't get shot. I never got shot. I just body checked the missile. So yeah, for a bit of a context, it's for a character class called Titan. They are your generic bruiser type, so why not headbutt things? Do what you willst. But of course, like with the ingredients, you still kind of have to put in a little bit of spice to keep it interesting. So as an example, would be the inconsistent narrator, and the reference to Skyrim, like the Skyrim lore collection, is very much intended there. As in, like if you have read Elder Scrolls lore, and if you know Brian Gilbert, he very much recommends to not read all of them, which there are, I think, 400 books in just Skyrim alone. There are a couple of stories there from the same event, but told from different perspectives, and for multiple characters. So you get context. For example, if you have like items from, for example, the same battle, and from different people that are present, like for example, even at the same point of time at the same place. Like when the narration there is inconsistent, you start thinking on, wait, what actually is the truth that happened here? Like which one of these accounts is true, or which one is the truest, or is any of them true? Are they all just boastful, boastful speech after the battle? And in case, for example, going to the next point, in case, for example, have a set of items, you can, for example, have recurring characters there. Magic very much does this, as it's pretty much its only means of having a continuous story is to have the same recurring characters, have the effects, things happening over and over again. Then a little bit of a toss in. The profound is very much a subjective thing, but in general, like if you can put in something that gives players like pause to actually think about, like what is being said. Like, is there something that like we'd have to consider going forward, or should we just leave this be? Should be something, could be something interesting to be added, like as a reference to profound. Again, it'll be hard to see, but the card says, he traded sand for skins, skins for gold, gold for life, and in the end, he traded life for sand. So a thought on like if you wanted to drill into that, a little bit of thought on like what is actually important and like, is the thing that we're doing necessarily the correct thing? And last but not least here would be to potentially provide new meaning with context. And for that, we have yet another item from Destiny, a sword called the Lament. And the description there is, sorry, I also need to go in closer. Last thing, the Vex, a type of enemy, ever heard the grinding wells of vicious banshee. And for context for this weapon, as the context is a little bit necessary, is that the weapon belongs to a specific NPC that's in the history of the game. And like once you got the weapon, you actually get a little bit of context that this NPC, this legendary killer of these like this type of enemies, is actually a friendly gunsmith in your player hub called Banshee. That he just forgot that what has happened because he's been reset so many times because he's a robot. But with that, those are most of my thoughts trying to condense into a few short notes. And I hope you guys found something interesting or something you could use. But I am very much open to questions in case there's something you want to have added or bring to a point. And as for context, I do speak Finnish, so you can ask questions in either language.
It speaks to the player, not the character.
Yes, and it's not the only thing in the game that actually breaks the fourth wall. So fourth wall breaks can be a thing that can be used, but very much sparingly. So when you break the fourth wall, you very much immediately bring a pause to anyone who's reading the description, and it can. For example, like the dry harmcar grasp is one. There is a series of lore books, also called the Truth to Power, which kind of point out that hey, there is this extra power, like this, a deific power in the universe that realized, oh, this is just a game, and you are playing this game, so are we, and you know. You have to play by the game's rules, but we don't necessarily. So, kind of nod that hey, the devs are a thing too, and they also want to have fun with the game. So, as I said, something that can be a shock and can be really interesting when done right, but if done in excess or in the wrong way, can kind of break the universal logic in the setting. Yep.
Unless I misunderstood your point, is the unknowable another example of breaking the fourth wall? Is that kind of
Uh, Not necessarily. So, unknowable in this context could mean something that just has happened, far outside the player's purview, or like more of an like concrete example. For example, is that if you had for example a more of a newer item, for example, let's say. Uh, Theoretical example: a king has been murdered, and the party eventually finds the murder weapon, and the item description there, for example, discusses more of the details and maybe hints on there being something more behind the murder than just, for example, a power grab. So something that happens outside the player's purview that they would not have immediate access to, or even like for example, yeah, something has happened like elsewhere, like nearby where they actually were. Yeah.
I do apologize, but I may need to struggle a little bit
Yeah. No rush. No
to
rush.
follow, but how does the concept of flavor text play with like tabletop RPGs, pen and paper RPGs? I noticed a lot of the, or rather all of the examples you used are from a setting where the player gets specific items they can refer to and that have stats, and like the flavor text is connected to those items.
Yeah.
But if say you have a role play campaign um, in your own built world, say that is the setting for a tabletop role play. Um, is there then ways to implement flavor text or quote unquote flavor text in some way, or is that a different thing?
No. It's just like it requires a little bit more work, of course, from the game master. But the best way, at least, for example, when you're actually playing on an actual tabletop, well, you can do it also in the VTT, are handouts. Like of course, like it may may take a lot of effort, for example, for the GM to have, for example, if the players are, for example, going into a bookstore and to have a couple of like select tomes there that they could stumble upon, or not stumble upon, which kind of probably is also one of the reasons why they kind of get overlooked a little bit. But yeah, handouts can, for example, for item cards or like letters or scrolls can be really helpful in actually having something very much physical to give to the players, and here have a little bit of this world in physical form at the table and have the flavor text there. So like the main reason why the flavor text here are from the video games, it's mainly because they are much more abundantly used. Since, for example, if we just go with the world's greatest role-playing game, D&D 5e, or any of its ilk, they generally tend to resort to item lists in inventory rather than actually having for example, an item card that can have a little bit more other than just that and a name. Welcome. Yeah?
Most of these examples are one or two sentences.
Yeah.
So at what point does flavor text become story?
Depends a little bit of context. Like for item cards, for example, one or two sentences is plenty. But if you wanted to go, like for example, for a book, of course, not really recommended to have a full book in your fantasy setting unless you really want to hammer that out.
I don't recommend.
Yeah, yeah, no. But if you, for example, if you for a book in a fantasy setting, I'd said something that's about a long, like a couple of paragraphs, so something the size of a blurb in the back of the book, for example, would be about the appropriate length to summarize, for example, the content, like the major points of what the book contains, rather than again having a full tome to hand to the players. Yeah.
On the contrary, how short can flavor text be? Is 3 words
I mean, we had an example of 3 words, so yours, not mine, but that usually requires a little bit of context. As said, the additional context for the example was the actual name of the item, which was the last word. Of course, like, it also had a description of who actually said those words and to whom. But the item still kind of works even without the attribution on whom those words were said to.
Sorry, I need to point out we had an example of a single word flavor text in that magic card.
Oh, catch.
Well, that's catch. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know of a game where there's something that appears to be flavor text, but is actually clues to some actual puzzle? The thing I can think of is fishing in Path of Exile, but
I mean, the Battlefield Gem kind of is already. It's a little bit more well, if you are very have played already through, it's quite obvious. But when you get the item, it's just a sentence that describes the gem, doesn't necessarily have the context on. For example, that withering will mean that, oh, I can enter this area later if I combine this with the rod. Yeah.
Concerning this, Contest Simulator does that a lot.
Yeah.
Lots of text we later realize, oh, it's not just flavor text, it's actually mechanics.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, in general, as I said, flavor text, in general, should be like it can have the meta gameplay aspects to it. But yeah, Cultist Simulator does do indeed that the flavor text turns later on into mechanics, which also kind of plays into aspect. Oh, you are in a cult. You are being indoctrinated. All these words are suddenly turning into things that actually have effects on the world. Any more questions? Yeah?
I have a question that is a bit a mix of the first two.
Okay?
Talking about the unknowable.
Yeah?
Thinking if you had any example how to incorporate that as a game master in a tabletop role-playing game.
Yeah, it's probably one of the more difficult aspects to do well. As shown, the Whisper of the Worm is a very solid example of how to do that. For example, trying to remember the name. Well, one of the guest GMs for Critical Role and Dimension 20, Aegar, I don't remember the first name. Yeah, does some of those vignettes of, you don't see this, but this happens. So something like that would be fairly simple, and something that especially if you have intrigue or mystery in your setting would be one of the best uses for the unknowable. To have something that something, for example, that the party has been trying to find an answer to it, why has this happened, and then find, for example, in the previous example, the murder weapon, and that has a hint on, oh, we should actually go talk to these barons over there that have been actually throwing money around for some reason, because this, for example, because this item has, well, not necessarily as simple, because who would in their right mind would have a weapon that has the symbol of, oh, this is signature, we did this. Would be more for example, that this is the handiwork of, for example, the smithies of this, of these barons, for example. Okay, any more?
One more question.
Yeah.
Well, it's very time-consuming, of course, to write this. Of course, it's very time-consuming to write this text. So, for example, if you're making the role-playing book, that's not necessarily a game that not every player will see.
Yeah.
This is kind of a cynical question. Is it worth it for a game designer to write these long descriptions if only a few players will see these? And how much effort should you put into the flavor texts?
It really depends on what level of a GM you are, or what type of a GM. I personally am more of an improv GM. For example, the Dress of Grace example from earlier was literally just something thrown in at the table. And from context, so a little bit of context for that for the dress was that one of the players in the party was a half elf, so they were going into the like ruined kingdom of the high elves, and they just found this dress that happened to belong to these characters' high elven queen mother, and it still fits, even though half elves, being half human, a little bit larger. And through that context, the players found like pretty much the perfect explanation of, oh, this was from the time when this character actually got kidnapped, so she was eating a lot to sink her sorrows, and oh, yeah, that's why it fits. It's larger, and of course it had the dexterity bonus to make sure she's still able to twirl the best way in the high elven galas. But yeah, to circle back, it really depends. This is one of those spots where, like, if you're not opposed to it, like having for example, a prompt list, from ChatGPT might be something that you could utilize to remove some of the labor involved. But for if you want to prep. Something that is actually outside of the immediate story being handled, probably the best option would be to have a short list of a few options on hand, and then, for example, in the moment roll for those, rather than have a massive amount of very much location-specific stuff, unless you are very much spending time, for example, in a point or a hex scroll in a specific area. Yeah.
Hi, if we're talking about specifically non-humorous descriptions,
Yeah.
where do you think the line between useful information and exposition dump lies?
Good question. Good question. So that kind of goes to the scope creep aspect of it. So in general, for example, if we're talking about single items, if you limit just the description to just one or two sentences, you can't really draw too much on to add a massive amount of exposition. So in general, for items, I'd say the best option there would be to just hint at the story rather than just telling it outright. So, if you start actually having a coherent line of stories from collecting specific items, then we're talking about a full-on narrative rather than having just a bit of description on where this item has come from. Okay. Any more? Because if that is all the questions, then thank you very much for coming to this ramble, and hope you enjoyed and got something out of it.